I happen to, again, and we're going to get into some details here. This book came out a year and a half ago. It's a collaborative effort with really worldwide. They self-published it. It's a fascinating story in actual design and process and publishing of the book. It uses a canvas of 9 different attributes to describe the business model. And you read it from sort of left to right, with the right being the customer segments. There's a value proposition and a set of customers. There are channels on how that value is delivered to those customer segments, and there are relationships that are built in those interactions. All that is done, and you're extracting value from the marketplace in terms of revenue, okay? On the left-hand side is all the cost side. So what's it cost to deliver that from a key resource standpoint? What are the key activities? Somebody said Kroger's and logistics. I think Walmart, key activity there, logistics. It's not just selling stuff. Who are your key partners? And then what's the cost structure? So when you take the 2 bottoms, you should be doing this for a profit. There's a very nice template. You can go search this on the web. It's taken that nice graphic, and you can put this on your wall, and you can start then to fill this out and put in your guesses. So this is the first thing he says: get a whiteboard out, put this up, and fill in your guesses. Value proposition seeks customer problems and satisfies customer needs. Value propositions. We'll go into a whole lot of detail. Customer acquisition, different types of revenue. What are your key resources? In Therex, intellectual property is a major resource. We spend a lot of time with IP attorneys from all over the world talking about different technologies and how to cultivate and create defensible intellectual property. Key activities, who are your key partners, and then this discussion on costs. So, I'm going to marry this now, post number 2. I'm going to marry this to Steve Blank's work. So in this post, he does just this in a very short article. His point is, start here with your guesses. It's a set of untested hypotheses. And then overlay Steve Blank's work. So that you test the problem, customer, user, payer on the right. You have demand creation, channel, test in the middle, value proposition, market type, competition. He would say, and we'll talk a little bit about agile development, that's what drives, that's the antithesis of waterfall development, the customer development team, who your key partners are, and the cost structure. But, so, if these are your guesses, something interesting happens, because you're not done once you fill this out, right? So you've got your guesses. The next thing to do is go get some real data. So for every assumption you make in this model, you need to go validate, verify it in the market with a real customer. And what's going to happen is you're going to be wrong. And this is what he calls a crisis. In the old business plan world, it would be a crisis that would lead to an epic failure, potentially. But with a learning loop in there, he creates the opportunity then to go back to the customer discovery portion and retest and replan. So you come up with another set of guesses. If you think back to the Iridium business plan, the one key component that was missing was this learning loop. Okay? What I see over and over and over again is the lack of getting outside the building. And people, I think it's because people gravitate in some cases, most of the types who start companies are the engineering types, and so you end up where you're comfortable, writing code, designing hardware, And it's not natural for you to go test that idea with a stranger, right? I made this presentation or the form of this presentation to a group of students. That tweet came out. How many people are Twitter users? I always like to ask. A little bit older crowd. 2 people in a college, well, 2 in 2 classes. And that proves my hypothesis that college students don't give a crap about Twitter. But this came out right before I made the presentation. Entrepreneurs should never give up, but the need to learn when to kill a business model or pivot into a new one. Pivot being that learning moment. When a crisis arises, you're almost out of money, can't figure out what sales have not materialized. Repeat it. I've sold it once. I got 8 betas and none of them will convert to real cash money. It's because you've got a crisis and your business model sucks.
There's another good book that Seth Godin's The Dip, which is all about that same thing, which is what should you keep doing and what should you stop doing, what do you kill, and I think it follows that same theme.
So what are the key learnings? It's a framework, a place to start and hang your ideas. If it's not a living, breathing document, it's doing you no good. Find a way to document your thoughts. Well, the other thing that drives me crazy is people they use the excuse of not writing a plan because they don't have time. To me, you gotta find time to get your thoughts on paper. Things become real when you put it, and I go back to paper and pencil. One of the things I always test when I read a business plan or talk to an entrepreneur is try and understand their level of thinking. And generally speaking, it's been in the past the written word that tells me how much you've thought about what you're doing. So I can look at a plan and understand the level of detail and your level of thought process by your business model. If you just skimmed across the top and answered 2 or 3 of the big key questions and haven't really dug deep, it's pretty obvious. Again, it's not real till it's out of your head, and in reality, it goes back to the point out there. And then guess what? You're an entrepreneur, you're going to fail. You can either fail and let it defeat you, or you can fail and get up and do it again. Most entrepreneurs don't understand that word failure because they don't accept it. That's what keeps us going. So that's a framework. I don't know, I just like that chart. There's the model. So, all right, so I've talked a lot and said a lot of things, but I've raised money too, and it's still a fact. You got to have a plan to raise money. All right, so you can't avoid that. If you have a subscription agreement, the lawyer says you got to have a business plan. Don't let him tell you that that's a 35-page document or a 50-page document. It is a plan, and I would suggest the plan looks like this. It's a 2-page summary document. Use as few words as possible and as much white space, and design it so it's beautiful. It's attractive, put it on really nice paper, use color, use pictures, use fewer words. But it's a teaser. It's what you give to everybody. It has your tagline, it has your problem that you're solving. It will require and beg that person to call you and say, I want to know more about your company. You got a 12-slide presentation, no more. 3 bullets a slide, 5 words per bullet. Use lots of pictures. If you can do it with only pictures, it's preferred. It consists of your business model canvas, and now here's my financial analyst hat. Everything for me ends up in a spreadsheet. I have a spreadsheet that has all my assumptions on it and the variables associated with it, and it creates a pro forma cash flow statement. I want to know how much money it's going to take for me to hit my goals, and I want to know when I'm going to run out of money and when I'll need money next, or when I'm going to be able to sell the company for $1 gazillion. So, living documents updated when reality is discovered. When reality is discovered, that's the crisis point. So when you have a crisis point, you're really discovering reality. It just depends on whether reality fits your model or not. So, it's a quarter till. Questions or comments?
Does Lexington support pivoting?
Now you're talking cultural question.
Yeah.
I would say no. I would say no. It's a wholly different experience out, in the valley for Southern California, Austin, Boston. People's failures are applauded in some respects. Sort of a part of the natural evolution of an entrepreneur.
Well, would you repeat the question, please?
The question was, are pivots what did you say? Accepted in Lexington? In other words, are failures, I think you actually said failures, are failures accepted in Lexington? I think it's a tough one to swallow. Here's a little nugget though I have these disconnects about my hometown. Lexington is where syndication started as a legal form. I don't know, that may be an urban legend, but I believe it. And it started in the horse business. Syndication is how venture capitalists today raise money. We know more about syndication in this town probably than most of the VCs elsewhere. And yet we are constantly struggling with raising capital for startup companies. So go figure that. Questions? Come on.
Could you describe a little bit more about syndication?
Syndication is the selling of equity, a pool of equity for ownership in a company. So when you syndicate a stallion, for example, you bring in outside investors and you're giving them a unit, a share of that stallion. It's the same principle when you sell a company, or raise money, I should say.
Do you have a theory on why it's so difficult here?
I have lots of theories. I think, especially technology and technical startups, it is cultural. I think for forever and a day, and I grew up here, it was always, what's your daddy do, right? Meaning, so what are you going to do, right? Because most people went to work with their dads or in their dad's company. And so the mindset of, when I graduate school, I'm going to start a company. I'm talking to Lewis County native. This is an interesting little story. I was in Carter County Saturday night. There were 3 MIT grads in a group of 30 in a barn in Carter County. He said by the time they become juniors and seniors, they're all starting companies at MIT. And they're all in their different labs, building stuff, sneaking around the university dollars and starting companies. So I think it's a cultural phenomenon. And I'll tell a story on myself. My dad worked for Hilliard Lyons as a retail broker here for 30 plus years. I called him and said, hey, heard of this company called DataBeam? He said, heck yeah. He said, Hilliard Lyons helped raise money for him. I said, well, Dad, why didn't you tell me? Oh, I didn't think you needed to know. So it was just a cultural thing, I think.
We're taught to go to school. We're taught to go to school, get good grades, and get a good job.
Get a job. That's right.
That's what we're taught.
And there is an interesting dilemma there, because sometimes, maybe most of the time, that doesn't necessarily square with what our passion is. And entrepreneurs, if you're successful, it's your passion, right? It's not viewed as a job. I'll pretty much work. I don't have hours, right? How many of you guys have hours?
So the big banner up on the Commerce Lexington window says top 7 cities in the country to start and run a business or something like that. Do you have any idea where that came from? Or why that's... How is that compatible with some of the other things we're talking about?
It was from the Onion, Scott.
Got it.
Thanks, Wes, for the bailout.